years later, the Boy Scouts of America engaged in a group-wide purging of gays and atheists in their ranks. The question, what do camping, canoeing, and tying knots have to do with religion, has always confused me a bit. In my experience, the Cub Scouts and the Webelos, which are both directly related to the BSA, are religious groups first, and everything else second. That those two groups also operated in a secular manner in some other packs and schools didn't seem to become known to us. We were never told about any kind of secular scouting groups. On the one hand, I wouldn't want to join any group that wouldn't want me to join their group, knowing all they need to know about me. It just doesn't seem right to me that anyone would want to fight for their place inside such a narrow and bigoted group. But I found out years later that there are a great many Boy Scouts who have no religion and say so. There are several Eagle Scouts who have no religion. I met some when I worked for American Atheists many years after Holy Ghost School. In our school, the Cub Scouts, along with the Brownie Scouts, who met at our school as well, were both religious in nature. Of course, I don't remember them talking to us about gays and lesbians. It seems that if they're so serious about keeping out that segment of the population from their group, they ought to mention it specifically in their oath. Just talking about morality is too broad. We were kids. These issues just didn't matter to us, as they shouldn't matter to other kids involved in scouting. We were busy goofing off and running around and playing. At the beginning of each meeting, there was a prayer. The whole room became silent, save for the priest in attendance. There was always a priest at the pack meetings. The prayer was long and mystic, loaded with typical Roman Catholic rhetoric as usual. Then the prayer ended, and life went back to normal. For one of our pack meetings, we were given a project to complete at home and bring back at the next pack meeting. We were given several basic crafts objects in a brown paper grocery bag and told to make something impressive out of everything in the bag. Our instructions included making sure that we use everything in the bag and leave nothing out. These things included a paper towel roll, some twine, some cardboard, an empty plastic gallon milk container, and a few other things. We could make all kinds of things with those items and some Elmer's glue. We were masters in the use of Elmer's glue. But what could we make with these simple and unrelated things that would impress someone? We had a couple of weeks to make it happen. My father attended most of the pack meetings with me, and he had a PhD in physics, so this wasn't going to be so much of a grand challenge after all, I thought. We took the bag of items home and laid them out on the table. I was lost for ideas, and already my dad was thinking out loud about what we could do. I learned a lot about building from him, and we eventually decided on building an overblown mousetrap. We used the empty plastic milk jug as a housing after we cut the bottom out of it and glued it to the cardboard, which we used as a base or foundation. The other parts we infused into the housing with amazing technical grace. My dad also taught me how to build model airplanes. By the time we were done, all of the parts were somehow utilized. We tested it, and it actually worked. Or at least it would have worked on any blind elderly mouse who's drunk at the time. The mechanism worked though, and that was the way we were going to impress the judges. We didn't win that competition, but we did get honorable mention for creativity, I believe. It was a thrill just to see it in action, as unlike most mousetraps, ours worked at its own meticulous pace. This was one of the few times that I bonded with my father as a kid. We didn't talk much, but we shared the interest of building things. I especially preferred 1 to 35 scale World War II fighters and bombers of the European theater. It's always a great release of frustrations to build a model airplane, especially when you really take your time about it. 4th grade was pretty easy for me, and life was getting easier outside school and church. I began to forget some of the problems of the world. The year was 1978. I was in the 4th grade when one day we heard the news about something called the Jonestown Massacre. Over 900 Christian followers of the Reverend Jim Jones took their own lives using grape Kool-Aid with cyanide in it. They did this at their compound in the dense jungle of the nation of Guyana, which is in South America. The compound they created was a farming-based commune intended to be cut off from society and immune to American federal government harassment. There were over 900 people who killed themselves, and several others were murdered by Jones's henchmen. I remember it was a big deal in my family. We sat around the television and watched the footage of the bodies that carpeted the ground. My parents wanted me and my sister to see everything and know about it. I asked my mother, who is this Jim Jones, and how did he manage to convince all those people to kill themselves? She answered plainly, he was a religious zealot. He was their pastor, and they moved out there with him, and they all went nuts, I guess. A few years later, she would use the same term, religious zealot, when describing the Ayatollah of Iran. This was one of my first clues that religion was bad. I was up to my ears in the same religion as that Jones character, and some of my teachers were zealots. I found it easy to believe that a religion could cause a massacre like that all by itself. So I researched Jones and his church and that event, and I learned at an early age that yes, religion is that harmful. Jones started his preaching career while he was still in school. As a young boy, he mesmerized people with his sermons. From then on, it was a steady ride to the top of his own church in San Francisco, and then down to Guyana. It was easy, with the help of religion, that is. Did you know that before he started his church, he was selling monkeys door to door? Yep, it's true. I decided that those 900 or so innocent followers of Jones and Christianity and the murder victims who were just visiting Jonestown did not die in vain, as long as people know about what happened and as long as people learn from it. There were only a handful of survivors who lived to tell about it. It is very good that the world was able to hear their message. If you've never heard of the Jonestown Massacre, I urge you to look it up and learn all about it. A very good made-for-TV movie was made about it just a couple years after it happened. The movie was called Guyana Tragedy. Yes, it has some minor detail errors, and it was made quickly after the massacre, and it was made for American TV, not exactly an evidence-demanding, scrutinizing market. It's still a great movie, though, and it really makes you think. It will also scare the bejesus out of you, as it puts you right there where it all happened. One reason I decided to write this book is because of the story of one of the survivors of the Jonestown Massacre. Her name was Hyacinth Thrash. She was the only person to survive at the compound itself. Here's a line from her as depicted in the play The Onlyest One Alive, which told about how she survived. Quote, "When I got outside, it was like a ghost town. I didn't see or hear anybody. I went to another senior citizen building where my friend Bertie lived. When I got to the door, I saw Bertie sitting in the chair, draped in a sheet. I could tell it was Bertie by her shoes. I says, 'Bertie, Bertie, what's wrong?' But she didn't move. Then I looked behind Bertie and saw Sister Lavina. She was covered up too. I pulled the sheet back to look at her. She was dead. I looked down the row of beds and all the people were either sitting up or laying in bed. They were all covered with sheets. I called, 'Bates, Bates,' but she didn't answer. I said, 'Oh my God, they came and killed them all, and I's the onlyest one alive. Why didn't they take me too?'" How on earth could any Christian continue to promote a religion instead of producing a God after the Jonestown Massacre, I thought. A giant lie is told every single day that Christians don't have to justify their efforts to push religion on everyone by producing their God. Many Christians say, "Well, what kind of evidence would it take to convince you? You have a high standard indeed." I say only one thing would ever convince me that a God exists, and that is a God. Simple. Only an actual God would suffice. All other forms of evidence have either been evidence of something irrelevant to the question or have been untrue altogether. An old piece of wood used to make boats that was found on top of a mountain isn't proof of a global flood or any specific story in the Bible. A urine stain that looks like Mary on a Mexico City subway station wall is not proof that Mary had a baby without having sex. The original and most important claim is there is a God. The only convincing evidence to back up that wild claim is that God itself being produced. It would have to be brought to humanity for a close skeptical examination and analysis. If it is verified as an actual God, we would then be obliged to place that God under arrest for crimes against humanity. That's if you ever read the Bible. Some of us have read it a lot, and we're very aware that the most horrible and prolific murderer mentioned in the Bible is God. If you don't agree with that, read the entire Bible. Every time you get to a part where someone kills someone else, write it down. When you get to the end of the Bible, you'll discover what other atheists have discovered after having done the very same exercise. God is the biggest murderer in the Bible, and even the biggest murderer possible, if you believe a God exists.